The wrong turn. This happened when I was about 19, right before I started my first year of college. It was the summer of 2018, and I was getting ready to move into a new city about 6 hours away. My parents offered to help me with the move, but I had a lot of stuff, way more than I could fit in their car or a couple of suitcases. Books, clothes, a mini fridge, and everything else I thought I'd need for dorm life. So I decided to drive myself. It just seemed easier to load up my own car and handle it all in one trip. I left home around 4 p.m., figuring that by the time I got to the city, it'd be close to 10, and the roads would be quiet. The highway was pretty empty, just a few cars and trucks here and there. As I drove, the landscape changed from the familiar suburbs I'd grown up in to long stretches of road lined with thick trees and the occasional farmhouse set back from the road. It was one of those drives where you're not really thinking about much, just watching the miles go by and focusing on getting to where you need to be. I'd been on the road for about 2 hours when my headlights caught someone up ahead. As I got closer, I realized it was a girl, probably around my age, walking along with a big backpack. She looked worn out. Her clothes were dusty, and she had that tired look like she'd been on her feet for way too long. My first instinct was to keep driving. It was late, and picking up a stranger on a deserted highway didn't seem like the smartest move. But as I passed her, she glanced over at me. There was something in her eyes that made me hesitate. I slowed down, my mind racing through the possibilities. What if she needed help? What if something was seriously wrong? Against my better judgment, I pulled over a few yards ahead of her and rolled down the passenger window just a crack. "Do you need a ride?" I asked. She hurried over and nodded quickly. "Please," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door lock. This wasn't the safest idea, but leaving her out here didn't feel right either. After a moment's pause, I unlocked the door and she climbed in slowly, every movement showing just how drained she was. As soon as she settled in, she asked my name and then introduced herself as Annie. I asked where she was headed. She told me she was headed to the next town, but things hadn't exactly gone according to plan. She'd been robbed while waiting for the bus, lost most of her money, and was now trying to make it to the next town on foot. I couldn't help but feel bad for her. We started talking, and she told me a bit more about her trip, that she was taking a gap year, trying to see the country before starting college. She had this adventurous spirit that I admired, even though her situation was far from ideal. We shared a few stories as we drove, and for a while, it felt like just a couple of kids on a road trip, swapping tales to pass the time. After about an hour of driving, talking on and off, she finally asked me to take a turn off the highway. It wasn't a major exit, just a narrow road that looked more like a side path than anything else. I hesitated, glancing over at her. "That road leads to a small town," she explained, pointing ahead. "It's where I'm headed." The road was dark, barely lit by my headlights, and the trees seemed to close in on either side. It didn't feel right, but she seemed sure, so I went along with it. I made the turn, the car's tires crunching on gravel as we left the main highway behind. After a few minutes, she asked me to stop. We were in the middle of nowhere with no lights or houses. I offered to drive her a bit further, but she insisted this was far as she needed to go. She thanked me, got out, and started walking right away. I stayed there for a moment, letting my headlights light her path until she was almost out of sight. Then I turned the car around, ready to head back to the highway. That's when I heard it, a scream that made my heart jump. I spun around and saw her running back toward the car, her face filled with terror. Right behind her, a group of bikers was closing in, the engines roaring like a pack of wild animals. Instinct kicked in. I slammed the car into reverse, speeding backward toward her. She was still running desperately. I unlocked the doors and she flung herself inside just as the guys surrounded us. There were 5 of them, circling the car, their engines growling as they revved them louder and louder. One of them, the leader I guess, walked up to my window, dragging a metal pipe along the ground. He tapped it against the glass, slow and deliberate, sending a chill down my spine. I immediately locked the doors and asked Annie to call 911. While she was managing to pull out her phone and dial, the guy with the pipe leaned in, grinning like he knew he had us. I couldn't hear what he was saying over the noise, but I didn't need to. I wasn't about to get out of my car. Annie was on the line with the dispatcher now and explained what was happening. I kept my eyes on the guys, trying to figure out how we were going to get out of this, but they had us boxed in, and it felt like we were running out of options fast. The guys were getting more aggressive, revving their engines and slamming their bikes against the car. I could feel the car shaking with each hit. Then, one of them started smashing the car with his pipe, hitting the side mirror and cracking the windows. My mind was racing. We couldn't just sit there and wait for them to break in. I had to get us out of there. I floored the gas, jerking the car forward. The guys weren't expecting it. Startled by my sudden move, they quickly reversed their bikes, some even skidding and falling. But I didn't stop. I kept my foot on the gas, swerving around them as they tried to block our path. They started shouting, and I knew they weren't going to let us go that easily. The car took a few more hits, and I could hear the metal crunching, but I didn't care. All I could think about was getting us out of there. I headed straight for the highway, pushing the car as fast as it would go. But the guys weren't done with us yet. They were right on our tail, engines roaring as they gave chase. Minutes later, we raced down the highway, the guys swerving dangerously close, trying to force us off the road. Just when I thought they might catch up, I heard it, the sound of sirens in the distance. They must have heard it too because they suddenly veered off, disappearing into the night. I kept driving until I spotted a police car coming our way. I rolled down the window and waved them down. The cops pulled over and I finally felt a wave of relief. We were safe. They had us follow them to the station to give our statements. After that, they arranged for someone to take Annie to the airport so she could get home. She thanked me again before she left, still shaken, but clearly relieved to be out of there. As for me, my car was pretty banged up from the whole ordeal, especially at the back where the bikers had rammed into it. I took a moment to get it checked out at a nearby service station. The damage was obvious, but luckily, it was still drivable. I didn't tell my parents about what happened. They'd only worry, and I figured it was better to just put it behind me. But ever since that night, I've been more careful on the road, especially when it comes to picking up strangers or taking unfamiliar routes. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you can never be too cautious. That creepy night, I drove through Bel Air. You know how some memories just stick with you, no matter how much time passes? Well, I've got that one that still gives me chills whenever I think about it. It happened back in college when I was working this part-time gig as a chauffeur. It was a pretty sweet job. Honestly, good money, flexible hours, and I got to drive these insanely expensive cars that I never could afford in a million years. So, one night, I get this call to pick up a man from a bar on Sunset Strip. It's pouring rain, and it's late, like almost midnight. The man's in his late 50s, totally hammered, and he's got to get back to his fancy villa up in Bel Air. I wasn't too worried about him, to be honest. I mean, sure, he might throw up, but it wasn't my car, so I wasn't stressing too much. What really had me on edge was the car itself. The thing was worth more than everything I owned combined, and I was terrified of scratching it, or worse, crashing it. Anyway, I'm driving up to Bel Air, and if you've ever been there, you know it's like a ghost town at night. Just these massive mansions and fancy houses tucked away behind tall trees and gates, and not a soul in sight. The roads are winding, and with the rain coming down, I was taking it real slow. The man in the back wasn't complaining, which was good because he was too drunk to care. Now, I don't know why, but as I'm driving, I start thinking about who might live in these mansions. Like, what if I ran into someone famous? I heard that Beyoncé has a place around there. So my mind was wandering, thinking about how cool that would be. But then, out of nowhere, I see something up ahead that totally snapped me back to reality. There's this super tall guy, like seriously tall, maybe 6'8" or something, just standing in the middle of the road. And get this, he's out in the rain with no hat, no umbrella, nothing, just soaking wet. But what really freaked me out was what he was dragging behind him. It looked like some kind of red fabric, but I couldn't really see what it was. My first thought was, is this guy cosplaying or something? But wait, it's not even Halloween. As I got closer, my headlights lit him up, and I could see him clearly. He had these creepy, hollow eyes that were just staring straight at me, like he was waiting for something. And before I could even process what was happening, he suddenly turns around and throws whatever he was dragging right at the car. Man, I slammed on the brakes so hard, I thought I was going to fly through the windshield. There was this loud thud as the thing hit the hood, and I swear I screamed like a little kid. When I looked up, I saw what it was. A frickin' blonde wig, all tangled and wet, just lying there on the glass. My heart was pounding like crazy, and I could feel the blood draining from my face. I looked back at the guy, and he was just standing there on the side of the road, rain pouring down his face, still staring at me with those dead eyes. It was like something out of a horror movie, but it was real, and it was happening to me. The man in the back seat must have heard me scream because he suddenly sits up, wide awake and freaking out. "What the hell happened?" he slurs. looking around all confused. I couldn't even speak at first. I just muttered, "I think I hit something." Of course, that didn't go over well. The man freaks out, yelling at me, asking what I hit, and before I could stop him, he jumps out of the car into the rain. I'm still in shock, but I get out too because what else am I going to do? We both walk around to the front of the car, and there, lying right in front of the wheels, is this hairless mannequin dressed in a red velvet dress. It was the creepiest thing I've ever seen in my life. The headlights made it look even weirder, all shiny and wet from the rain. The man I was driving just stares at it, then looks at me like, "What the hell is going on?" We both turned to look back at where the tall guy was standing, but get this, he's gone, just vanished into thin air. The man starts freaking out even more, runs back to the car and grabs his phone to call security. Within minutes, a couple of guards show up, flashlights and all, and start searching the area, but they don't find anything. No sign of the tall guy, no clues, nothing. It's like he was never there. I got chewed out by my boss the next day because the man I was driving filed a complaint. He was pissed, said I nearly gave him a heart attack. They told me to be more careful and blah, 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 but honestly, I was too freaked out to care. To this day, I have no idea what that was all about. I've driven that road a bunch of times since then, and nothing like that has ever happened again. But I still think about that tall guy, the wig, the mannequin, and I get this uneasy feeling in my stomach. It's just one of those things you never really get over, you know? Cry in the desert. It was 13 years ago when the four of us, Dammy, Layla, Jake, and I finally got back together after our first year of college took us in different directions. We all grew up in Phoenix, and after being apart for so long, we were itching to hang out like old times. When summer vacation hit, we knew we had to do something special. So, we decided on a road trip to Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument. It wasn't too far from home, but somehow none of us had ever been there before. We crashed at my place the night before, and by 2 a.m., we were on the road, excited to catch the sunrise and spend the day exploring the trails. It felt great to be together again, just like the good old days. The drive was going smoothly until about halfway there. Dammy started complaining about a stomachache. At first, we figured he could tough it out, but by the time we reached Gillum Bend, it was clear he needed a break. So, we pulled over at a gas station, hoping it'd be a quick stop, but it wasn't. Dammy disappeared into the bathroom, and the rest of us hung around, checking our phones and yawning as the minutes ticked by. What was supposed to be a quick pit stop turned into a 30-minute wait while Dammy tried to get himself together. None of us were thrilled about that delay, but what could we do? When he finally came back to the car, we knew we had to pick up the pace if we didn't want to miss the sunrise. We were back in the road, and I pressed the gas a bit harder, pushing the car up to nearly 60 miles per hour. The highway was dark and empty, and the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of someone shifting in their seat. Dammy, still nursing his stomachache, sat quietly in the front, trying to rest, while the others in the back seat had drifted off to sleep. It was just me, the silent road, and the goal of catching that sunrise on time. But then, out of nowhere, something shot out from the side of the road, and I barely had time to react. I slammed on the brakes, and the car screeched loudly, tires skidding across the asphalt. The car spun nearly 180 degrees, throwing all of us in a moment of chaos as we shouted in shock. When we finally stopped, everything fell silent again, except for the sound of Dammy groaning as he leaned out to throw up. My heart was racing, but the road was eerily still. That's when we heard it, a faint, painful cry coming from just ahead of the car. I immediately unbuckled my seatbelt and threw the door open. Layla and Jake scrambled out right behind me, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. As I stepped around the front of the car, the sight hit me like a punch to the gut. A woman lying in the road, right in front of the car, clothes torn and blood trickling down her forehead. She looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes and whispered, "My son, please, help him." Before I could even process what she said, a scream tore through the silence. It's Dammy's voice, full of panic. "There's a leg! A kid's leg!" That snapped us out of it, and we all bolted towards the bushes where Dammy was pointing. The woman struggled to her feet and stumbled behind us, her voice cracking as she cried out, "Caesar!" We pushed through the brush, branches scratching at our arms, until we suddenly stopped. There, lying on the ground, was a boy, no more than 10 years old, his face pale as a ghost, his chest was barely moving, and his calf was horribly swollen, with 2 nasty puncture marks, definitely a snake bite. The woman kept pleading with us to help him, her desperation cutting through the shock that was starting to hit us all. She told us that her son had been bitten by a rattlesnake about an hour ago. She tried to slow the venom by keeping him still and wrapping the wound, but it was clear that it wasn't working. The kid looked really bad, and we were way out of our depth. I turned to her and told her to call for emergency help, but to our surprise, she quickly shook her head and refused, only asking us for the first aid kit. I glanced at Layla and Jake, and we all just froze, totally confused by her request. We knew a first aid kit wouldn't be enough. This kid needed serious medical help, and fast. As I looked at her again, something didn't sit right. That's when it clicked. Her voice had a slight Mexican-Spanish accent. At first, I figured she might just be from Mexico, but now I wasn't so sure. "Are you an illegal immigrant?" I blurted out, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Her face went pale as she stammered, trying to deny it, but the way she reacted just confirmed what I'd been thinking. My friends exchanged worried looks. We were all starting to realize this situation was a lot more complicated than we thought. Layla then, keeping her cool, turned to the woman and said, "If we don't get him to a hospital, he's going to die, and you'll regret this forever." The woman hesitated, her eyes darting between her son and us. Finally, she gave in and nodded, letting Layla make the call. But even as we waited for help, the tension hung in the air, leaving us all wondering if we were doing the right thing. Finally, the ambulance arrived. They whisked the boy away, the woman following closely behind, not looking back at us once. We stood there in the middle of the desert road, watching the flashing lights disappear into the distance. As we packed up our gear and headed back home, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were meant to cross paths with them. I kept wondering, was it worth it? Was risking everything, even their lives, worth the chance of something better? I don't know. Later that afternoon, we got the news. The boy had made it, but just barely. Turns out they'd been crossing the Sonoran Desert, trying to make it to the border when the snake bit him. They had been wandering for hours before they stumbled onto the road where we found them. The woman and her son were going to be deported, sent back to where they came from. It was inevitable, I guess. As I lay in bed that night, I kept replaying the events in my mind, wondering if we had truly helped or just prolonged their suffering. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel as clear-cut as it should be. In the end, I realized we were just as lost as they were, caught in a desert of our own. Someone I had to meet. So, this all went down in 2015 when I was 27. I had just wrapped up this long, exhausting project at work and finally got a break. 7 whole days off. I was pretty much running on fumes, so I figured it was the perfect time to visit my cousin Dave. We hadn't seen each other in months, and I was really looking forward to just chilling, like we used to when we were kids. Summers back then were all about goofing around at our grandparents' place, but after they passed, things changed. We didn't see each other as much, except for the occasional holiday visit. Anyway, I finally made the trip that summer. The first few days at Dave's were awesome. Just hanging out, stuffing our faces with his wife's amazing cooking, and catching up on all the stuff we'd missed. But of course, just when I was starting to relax, my boss calls with some urgent work emergency. So I had to cut the trip short. It sucked, but what can you do, right? After dinner, I threw my stuff in the car. Dave's wife, being her usual awesome self, loaded me up with enough snacks and drinks to last me the whole drive. We said our goodbyes and I hit the road, thinking it'd be an easy, quiet drive back home. It was late, the highway was empty, and I was just cruising along, enjoying the quiet. It's one of those long stretches of road where it's just you, your thoughts, and the hum of the engine. Not many cars around, and the night felt calm, almost too calm. Now that I think about it, the road seemed endless, just this ribbon of asphalt stretching out in front of me. Then, something strange started happening. The lights along the highway began to dim, and before I knew it, they blinked out completely. 1 second I'm driving along, and the next, it's pitch black. I slowed down, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Maybe a power outage or something? It felt off, but I wasn't too freaked out, at least not yet. As I kept driving, though, I started to get that all too familiar feeling. You know, the one when you suddenly realize you're really needing a bathroom, and it's gotta be soon. I drove on for a bit, hoping to find a rest stop or a gas station, but there was nothing, just miles and miles of empty road. Eventually, I decided to pull over. I figured I'd just take care of it quickly and get back on my way. When I stepped out, the night was eerily quiet. No cars, no people, just the sound of the crickets and the rustles of leaves in the breeze. It was so dark that my headlights were the only thing cutting through the night. Just as I was finishing up, I heard this faint crackling noise, like dry twigs snapping underfoot. It made me spin around, but the noise stopped as soon as it started. I figured it was just my imagination, or maybe some animal nearby, so I shrugged it off and got back to my car. But as I turned around, I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat when I saw a man standing right in front of the hood, lit up by the headlights in a way that made him look ghostly white. My heart skipped a beat, and fear washed over me. But it was his eyes, those unsettling, glowing red eyes that locked onto mine, making my blood run cold. He didn't move, didn't say a word. He just stood there, frozen, with those lifeless eyes fixed on me, staring like he could see straight through me. I tried to shake off the creepy feeling, forcing myself to stay calm. My voice came out shaky as I stammered, "Do you need help?" But he didn't respond. He just stayed there, motionless, his eerie gaze never leaving mine. Then, slowly, he turned his head, and that's when I saw it. Blood streaked down the side of his face, seeping from a deep wound. My stomach twisted, and before I could stop myself, I blurted out, "Are you okay?" I don't know what I was thinking, but I took a step toward him. That's when the headlights suddenly went out, plunging everything into pitch black darkness. I froze, blinded by the sudden loss of light. A cold wind swept through, cutting right through my clothes and sending a shiver down to my bones. I knew something was seriously wrong. Panic started to set in. I rushed back to my car, fumbling for the keys with shaking hands. I finally managed to start the engine, and the sound of it humming to life brought me a tiny bit of comfort as the interior light flickered on. But when I looked up, the man was gone. Just like that. He had disappeared without a trace. I didn't waste any time. As soon as the engine was running, I floored it, desperate to put as much distance between me and whatever that was. The highway stretched out in front of me, dark and empty, but now every shadow felt like it was hiding something sinister. My heart was racing, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those red eyes staring back at me. After driving for what felt like an eternity, I noticed something strange. Up ahead, the highway lights were still off, but there was this one spot that was lit up. It didn't make sense. There were no lights on either side, just this one area glowing faintly in the distance. It was like the road itself was illuminated. As I got closer, my car suddenly lurched forward, like it was being pulled by some invisible force. I tried to slow down, but the car seemed to have a mind of its own, dragging me straight toward that eerie glow. Panic gripped me again, as I desperately tried to regain control, but it was no use. The car rolled to a stop right in the middle of the illuminated area. I sat there, heart pounding, feeling like I was being watched. The whole place felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I scanned the area, looking for anything, any sign of what was causing this. That's when I saw them. A pair of raccoons scurrying near the side of the road, rustling through some bushes. At first I thought it was nothing, just wildlife doing their thing. But then something rolled out of the bushes. An arm, pale and lifeless. My stomach churned, and I could barely breathe. I threw the car door open and rushed out, yelling at the raccoons, but they scattered before I got close. I stood there, staring at the arm lying in the dirt, trying to convince myself that this couldn't be real. I ran back to the car, hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone to call 911. I didn't dare go back out to check, just sat there, staring into the dark, waiting for the police to arrive. When they finally did, the officers carefully pulled a body out from those bushes. It was a man, decomposed beyond recognition. The arm I had seen was now fully exposed, and I noticed the flesh had been gnawed away in places, probably by those raccoons. The sight was enough to turn my stomach. I gave my statement, still shaken, and then drove straight home. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking that decomposed body might have been the same guy I saw standing by my car. The blood on his head, the way he just appeared out of nowhere, it all felt like too much of a coincidence. Now every time I drive past that stretch of highway, I get this uneasy feeling and can't help but glance over at that spot where I first saw those raccoons. The image of the body still sticks with me, reminding me that some encounters aren't easily forgotten and can blur the line between the living and the dead. The unexpected ride. I was 38 at the time and had been driving a taxi for 5 years. It's not the flashiest job, but I knew the city inside and out and can handle just about anything that came my way. But I had one rule: never work past midnight. Sure, the night shifts paid better, but the risks? Not worth it. I stuck to that rule, no exceptions. Well, except for that one night. That night was slow. Too slow. By 11 p.m., I'd barely had any customers, and the streets were unusually quiet for a Friday. Normally, I'd be busy enough that the hours would fly by, but not that night. I was ready to call it quits when my phone pinged with a ride request. The destination was a suburb about 30 minutes away. I checked the clock. If I took the ride, I'd be back just before midnight. It seemed like an easy way to end the night with a bit more cash, so I figured, why not? I headed to the pickup spot, which was a quiet street on the edge of downtown. My passenger was a young woman who looked like she had had a long day herself. She got in, and we set off. As we drove, the city's lights started to fade, and the roads got quieter. The tall buildings turned into factories and construction sites. It was kind of eerie how fast everything changed, but I didn't think much of it. I'd driven these roads before, and nothing had ever happened. The ride was uneventful, just the usual small talk and the hum of the engine. But as I got closer to her drop-off point, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was far from the familiar city streets I knew. Still, I brushed it off. After all, I was almost done with the ride, and then I'd be heading straight home. After I dropped my passenger off in the suburb, I started heading back toward the route that would get me home. The streets were even quieter now, with only the hum of my engine for company. As I turned onto the road leading back to the main way, I spotted a guy up ahead, standing on the edge of a bridge near the old cement factory. He was just standing there, wearing nothing but a pair of pants. Definitely not something you see every day, especially not this late at night. At first, I figured he was just some drunk who wandered off from a party, so I didn't think much of it. But as I got closer, I realized he wasn't just standing there. He was talking to himself. Or at least that's what it looked like. There was no one else around, yet he was having what seemed like a full-on conversation. That's when I noticed how close he was to the edge, almost like he was about to jump. My heart started racing, and I slowed down, trying to figure out what was going on. I rolled down my window and leaned out, calling to him, "Hey, you okay?" My voice echoed in the quiet night, but he didn't respond. He just kept crying, his feet inching closer to the edge. My gut told me this wasn't going to end well. Without thinking, I drove my car up to the bridge, pulling over as close as I could get. I didn't have time to consider the risks. I just knew I had to stop him from jumping. I threw the car into park, yanked open the door, and rushed out towards the guy, shouting, "Hey, wait! Don't do it!" But before I could reach him, two men appeared out of nowhere, quickly cornering me against the railing. Each of them had a small knife, the kind you'd use to slice an apple, but in the dim light, those knives looked a lot more threatening. My heart was pounding, and I could barely think straight. "Give us your car, or he jumps," one of them said. I looked over at the guy on the bridge. His feet were half off the edge now, and he looked like he was about to lose it completely. He wasn't just scared, he was terrified. Like he was on the brink of something awful. I knew I should have done something, anything, but I just froze. The two guys were pressing in on me, and every second that passed felt like an hour. My mind was racing, but my body wouldn't move. The only sound was the wind and the low, shaky breaths coming from the guy on the bridge. Then I saw it. Headlights, coming up the road behind us. The light cut through the darkness, and the two men hesitated, glancing at each other. The car slowed down and stopped about 60 feet away, its headlights shining directly on us. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver started honking, once, twice, then more urgently, like he could tell something was wrong. The guys started backing off, looking less sure of themselves with every step. And to my shock, the guy on the bridge, who I thought was about to jump, suddenly snapped out of it. He stepped back from the edge. He turned and followed the other two as they slinked off into the shadows. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Just a minute ago, I was sure something terrible was about to happen. But now it was like the whole thing was falling apart. It turned out those three were in on it together. The whole thing had been a setup from the start. I called out a quick thanks to the driver who had saved me, then practically ran back to my car and slammed the door shut. In the rearview mirror, I saw the driver flick their headlights at me one last time before slowly driving off into the night. My mind was still spinning from everything that had just happened, but I knew I had to get home fast. This place was too much for me to stick around. I hit the gas and didn't look back until I was halfway home. By then, I was running on pure adrenaline. The whole way, I couldn't stop thinking about how naive I'd been. I didn't even think twice about rushing out of my car just because I saw someone who looked like they needed help. The whole situation was sketchy from the start, but I ignored all the red flags. I'll always be grateful to whoever it was that saved me when I needed it the most, and I know a simple thank you wasn't enough. After that night, I stopped working late shifts for a while. I definitely don't drive through that area anymore. It freaks me out whenever I think about how they set the whole thing up, playing on my instincts to help someone. It all felt so legit in the moment, and that's what scares me the most.